that last meeting. It's not been advertised. Be a relatively short meeting, basically to take care of the final financial business of the year is the basic plan of the needs for that meeting. So that's what will take place on the 30th. We do have December 2019 service awards, and we do have a few folks with us this evening. The first one is Andrew Dixon, 5 years of service, hired as a police officer in 2014 for the Fremont Police Department. And I believe Andrew is here. Please come forward. Congratulations, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Next one is Kelly Drake, hired in 2014 as a police officer for the Fremont Police Department as well. Thank you for your service. Thank you very much. And the last one attending is Kathy Belke, 15 years of service, hired in 2004 as an office associate for the Fremont Police Department. They wanted to clap for you already. Very much. Also, getting an award this evening but not attending is Wyatt Swartz, 15 years of service, hired as a firefighter for the Fremont Fire Department in 2004. Stephen Zoroban, 5 years of service, hired as a police officer in 2014 for the Fremont Police Department. And Bradley Hanson, 20 years of service, hired in 1994 as a police officer for the Fremont Police Department, was then promoted to sergeant in 1998. Oh, we got a few more, a whole nother page. James Butts, 20 years of service, hired as a police officer for the Fremont Police Department in 1999. John Batters, 15 years of service, hired in 2004 as an instrument and control tech for the power plant. Brian Powers, 15 years of service, hired in 2004 as an instrument and control tech for the power plant. Matt Steisko, 40 years of service, hired in 1979 as a tree trimming supervisor for the distribution department. And lastly, Deb Anderson, 20 years of service, hired in 1999 as an accounting associate for the accounting department. Congratulations to all of those folks. We want to say thank you for the years of service and all you do to make Fremont a better community. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item number 4. Item number 4 is a motion to adopt the current agenda for December 10th, 2019 regular meeting. Councilman Jensen.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to adopt the current agenda for the 2019 meeting.
Councilmember Legman.
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Next item is public hearings. It's item number 5. Ordinance 5517 to create a clean energy assessment district to establish definitions to provide the financing, administration, and collections to promote energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy systems known as property assessed clean energy district. This would be the second reading, and basically staff recommends this item be continued until January 14th. There's been questions that needed to be answered. We've been trying to get the representative here for this, for his presentation in regards to this ordinance. And the soonest he can be here is a January 14th meeting, which is the first meeting in January. So with that, I would take a motion to continue. Councilmember Jacobus.
I'll make a motion to continue ordinance 5517 to the January 14th, 2020 meeting.
Councilmember McLean.
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. This is items 6 through 17. All items in the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the city council, will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless council members or a citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Is there any items to be removed either by council or by the public? Councilmember Jacobus.
I'd like to have number 6 and number 13 moved off.
Councilmember Yerger.
And I have a question or two on item 8, the minutes.
Any other items in the consent agenda to be removed? I would take a motion to approve the consent agenda items 7, 9 through 12, and 14 through 17. Councilmember McLean.
Make a motion to approve consent agenda items 7, 9 through 12, and 14 through 17.
Is there a second? Councilmember Jensen.
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
First item, motion to approve November 27, 2019 through December 10, 2019 claims. Authorized checks to be drawn on proper accounts. Councilmember Jacobus.
I had this removed because I did have a few questions which have been lingering for a few months, and that is in regards to the collections activity report. Thank you, Mr. Newton, for answering some of the questions that I had regarding that. And I did bring copies of the collection reports for this, if anybody would like to see them, but you all received it in an email through Brian. And I guess my point is, I don't know how this is accounted for monthly, because there's nobody that's approving writing off these funds, and we didn't do it at the end of this last fiscal year. And I don't understand how these are accounted for. And I know, Brian, you had answered and you said in regards that they write off 5-year-old accounts and that there's X amount of funding, 65 grand set aside for doubtful accounts, et cetera. But we have a fair amount of money that is sent annually to collections, and out of that, we get very little of that. We pay a monthly fee per account, and then that's taken off the top. And I'm just wondering, where does that fund come from? How is that allowed for on our annual budget?
Yeah, Dan can help me too, but Brian Newton, City Administrator. So the report that I emailed you today, that's just the collections activity that all 4 utilities have each month. And so if you look at the one I emailed, I think it was for November, I believe, and you can see the activity and it's kind of the, as I said in the email, it's kind of the ebb and flow of collections. Wintertime, everybody pays their bill because nobody wants their lights shut off, and so collections are down. Spring and fall, typically people are slow paying their bills, and we do shut more accounts off, and so the collections run higher. This is not the write-offs. As I explained in the email, we budget about $65,000 a year for suspected bad debts. That's a charge to each utility for revenue that we're not going to collect because people aren't going to pay their bill. And so rates have to be slightly higher to make up for that because we're not getting that estimated revenue. And then, as I said in the email, about once a year, and typically I think it's towards the end of the fiscal year, we go back and we write off any accounts that are 5 years and older, just to clean them up and take them off the books. That amount is around I think last year we looked at was $27,000. So you can see, even though the collection report may have said we've had $100,000 that month in collections, we only budgeted $65,000 for the whole year of doubtful accounts, but we actually only write off 27,000. And so we do a really good job of collecting that money up to 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, we kind of give up on it and say, you know what, if they aren't going to pay us by now, we're getting it off the books. Does that make sense?
Just curious if everybody had a chance to review the email, which you had sent out later. And of course, I didn't even get my email out until yesterday, so appreciated your response. But I'd ask to have this received. All it is what the utility board had received at their meeting at the end of November. They receive this monthly. And I guess what I'm asking is, who approves these write-offs, since it never comes to council?
You mean the
And-
27,000?
Yeah, when it comes to that, because we didn't have that in consideration of our
Nope.
expenditures at the end of the year.
Nope, it's part of the
So-
budget, it's part of the write-offs that we normally do. I don't know what the city write-off is amount, but
Is that a
it's not.
policy?
No, it's not something, I don't think we have in policy, it's just something I suspect we probably have always done as part of the accounting function.
I mean, how does that work? I actually would make a motion to have this received, oh, by the way, so everybody at least has a copy,
I mean,
in
that
case
is
they
a
don't
public
understand.
document, it's part of the UIB
That's
packet.
correct.
So-
It is. It's a public document, so just asking to have it received. Motion made.
Is there a second? A second? Oh, Brad?
I'll second the motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0 to receive, Mayor.
Councilman Yerger?
So I'd like to have one follow-up question, I guess, to the questions that were raised by Councilmember Jacobus. So since we're not approving something, it doesn't come across our purview with regards to claims, and it doesn't come across our purview with regards to the financial director's regular reports that we see on a monthly basis, my question then would be this: besides at budget time, is there any operating report produced by the city that shows income and expense operations where these uncollectibles, reductions to revenue or additional expense, if you look at it, whichever way you look at it, is actually recorded in a report that comes across council's purview that we approve?
Yeah, I'm sure the monthly reports for the utilities has a line item in there for the write-offs, right, Dan?
Yeah, Dan Goebel, City of Fremont Finance Department. Those would be in the administration line of each respective fund on the utility side.
And it's on the monthly reports. We're just overlooking it because it's a one line.
The quarterly reports that the council receives.
Quarterly
yes.
reports.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We do a monthly, but we just summarize it quarterly and present it to council.
That is correct, yes.
Any other questions? I would take a motion to Councilmember Jacobus.
I would like to have this at least considered in our financials, even if it's just in the consent agenda on a monthly. I'd asked for that a few months ago and just had anticipated, and I got asked about it recently. And
What
I
would you
think
like added? Because.
the same thing that's in the utility
Yeah,
boards.
but there's no
Said-
action taken.
That's
There's no
correct. It's
action
just to receive.
for that, just to receive. It's
Just
a
receive, it can be included easily in the financial report by Jody.
I mean, you can log into the UIB monthly online, you can see it every month,
It's an ask.
okay?
Any other questions? Take a motion to approve the November 27, 2019 through December 10, 2019 claims. Authorized checks to be drawn on the proper accounts. Councilmember Yerger?
Make a motion to approve the November 27th through December 10th claims and authorize checks to be drawn on the accounts.
Councilmember McLean.
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Next item is item 8, dispense with and approve November 26, 2019 City Council meeting minutes. Councilman Yerger.
Yes, I asked to have that pulled just for this purpose. I don't have a problem really with the regular meeting minutes, but I've raised this issue before, and at the end of the month, we have this open public comment period, and it only gets sort of a one line in the opening line of the regular meeting that says we had a period and comments were made. My concern is that that's not adequate under state authority, and we should do a better job of trying to protect ourselves in that regard by at minimum listing the number of speakers that spoke at the public meeting and what their topics were, so that we can record for purposes of our minutes that we did not violate open meetings rules by allowing comments to be made on items that are on our agenda, because we're specifically admonishing the public they can speak about anything they wish other than things that are on our agenda. And I think recording what they spoke about just briefly wouldn't take much additions to the minutes, and it would help protect the council long term by recording that for posterity. So I would ask that we go ahead and approve the minutes for the regular meeting, but we amend the minutes to include the open public comment, number of speakers, and the topics that were covered. And that would include the drop cards that are put in the box that people don't actually speak to, or that we don't read at the meeting. They only become known after the fact.
Tim Buckley, City Attorney. There's no statutory requirement that the list be made. I don't think the city would be in any exposure to liability of a violation of the Open Meetings Act as is, but it's up to the city if they want to implement this type of policy, I guess, for the minutes going forward.
Councilman Eurer.
I would call council's attention to Nebraska 8413 that indicates the substance of all matters discussed are supposed to be included in the minutes. And also, there's an Attorney General opinion, 7576, Attorney General 150, opinion 116, dated August 29th of 1975, that says an agenda may not be used as the minutes of the meeting. And that's essentially what we're doing when we say it was an open public comment meeting and people spoke. Well, that's the agenda. But actually more than that occurred. We had people get up and speak about given topics, and we ought to record that. That's my lay opinion.
Council.
Again, Tim Buckley, City Attorney. In response to that, the first statute cited said discussion. There's no discussion during open comment period, so there's nothing to report as a discussion item. And secondly, and I'm trying to remember what your second point was. It was a Attorney General opinion. I'm sorry. I believe the agenda basically says open comment period. Nothing can be discussed that's on the agenda. The minutes do more than just restate that, from what I see, that says that the mayor opened the public comment period and comments were made. I mean, it's simple, but it's more than just the agenda item that was posted.
Councilman Eurer.
Quite honestly, I don't understand the resistance to adding 3 people spoke at the last meeting. The topic was X, Y, and Z. That doesn't even take 2 lines of text in the minutes, so it's not something that creates an arduous amount. And having that documented helps prove that the council did not entertain discussion of any item on our agenda, and I think that's important.
I think, as I said earlier, if the council wants to do it, they can. I'm not resisting this. I'm just saying from a legal standpoint, I don't think it's necessary, and the city is exposed to liability for not doing what you're suggesting.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Jacobus.
Did you say we are or we're not exposed? I didn't quite hear that.
We are not exposed to liability if we do not follow Mr. Yerger's recommendation. If we just leave it as is, we're not exposed to liability, is what I'm saying.
And if we amend the minutes to include them, are we exposed then? Is it the flip side, the opposite then? Or?
I don't believe so.
So either way, it's not a big issue.
It's more of
It's a non-issue?
I think it's a non-issue in my opinion. It's more of just covering yourself is what Mr. Yerger wants, but it's, like I said, it's not necessary, but it's not a problem.
So it doesn't hurt to amend them in order to
I would
pass.
say no.
Okay. And I would make the motion to amend the minutes as stated by Mr. Yerger.
Councilman Yerger,
I would second that motion.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-3, Mayor.
The last item from the consent agenda is item 13. Yeah, we do. Now I would take a motion to approve the amended minutes of November 26, 2019. Councilmember Jacobus,
I'd make a motion to approve the amended minutes.
Councilman Yerger,
Is the motion to approve the amended minutes, the regular agenda minutes, including the missing data in the public comment period, or we're only approving the regular agenda minutes?
The amended minutes as stated, and we just voted and moved on.
But we didn't put in the number of speakers and their topics in the amended minutes. That's my concern.
My motion that I had made was the amendment, as you had stated, to include all of what you had stated, Mr. Yerger. So when I made the amendment, I made the amendment to this set of minutes to include the issues that you addressed, which we now voted on and passed. So now I just made a motion to approve the amended minutes. Okay?
Councilman Yerger,
Then I will second that motion. Thank you for the clarity.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Item 13. Motion to authorize the mayor to sign the interlocal agreement with Dodge County. Councilman Yerger.
Sorry.
Oh, Councilmember Jacobus.
So close, just one more over. The only question I had is, so that the council, whether it's all of us here now or a whole new group, whatever, and regardless of who the mayor is, should this occur, I would like to have something in this language that states that there will be notification duly, we will notify in a very short amount of time, and I don't know how to describe that time, to give notification to the council as a whole. So we don't have a chain of events that are transpiring without the knowledge of the governing body itself. Because I realize when a catastrophe hits, and it is really the first foray into that arena that Fremont suffered for a long period of time, that was the last thing on somebody's mind, but it should have been somewhat towards the forefront instead of 3 and 4 days after the fact. And that frustration was real, but there was a lot of things going on. But should this event occur, there's conversation. It should at least be brought to the attention of the council. Not that we have to have a say or deny, just so that we're duly informed of what's going on. Whether it's, again, us 8 or a whole different set of 8 people. So somehow I'd like to have this language amended so that's at least addressed, so that's something that's a natural occurrence, so that's not lost sight of again.
Councilmember McLean.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just wondering if that should be part of an interlocal agreement, though. It feels like it should be, because this doesn't just apply to the city of Fremont. So I agree with your premise, but I'm not sure this is the place for it. And maybe legal could opine on that.
Well, I mean, to an extent, that's true. The interlocal binds other jurisdictions, and this, what Ms. Jacobus is saying, sounds more like it being just a policy within the city of Fremont itself that we really couldn't enforce on any other jurisdictions that are parties to the interlocal.
But from our entity, there should be some information that then is given out. So should this become an issue or something that has to be addressed, and we have employees working out in the county to address a catastrophic issue or vice versa, there should be some kind of chain of information that lacked in this March 2019 emergent that didn't transpire. I mean, there just was lack of notification. And it was very fragmented, and some of the information that had eventually got out, and was actually more through social media or through radio or other means. And I think the governing body should have information given as it's transpiring. So I wasn't sure how to get this added to this, or if that was the appropriate place, but I wanted to make sure and address it.
And I basically would say it would be a policy as we move forward. And again, it needs to be stressed, and that's why, you know, it's not very often that you have a situation like we had on March 19th of last year. So we don't deal with those every day, and you know, but again, that's why you've got a full council here that has a memory and staff that's here that can see to it, at least in the short term, that can happen. So, any other comments, Councilman Yerger?
Going along the line of what Councilmember Jacobus was requesting, I assume this is boilerplate language and has been or is being proffered to others as well, and would have to get scrutiny by them if we were to change any language in this interlocal agreement. The only reason I'm asking is that I think you could do perhaps what Councilmember Jacobus wants in this large paragraph towards the end of the agreement, where it says we agree to indemnify, hold harmless, protect, and defend. And we could insert a phrase that says, and inform, or keep informed, or something like that, that would suffice to give us the information that Councilmember Jacobus is asking for without writing a policy. But it would mean that everybody would have to adjust for this whereas statement, I guess, if this is a common document for all parties.
Yeah, that would apply to Dodge County, and so I don't know if they would be.
Okay.
Tim?
Yeah, Tim Buckley, City Attorney. I mean, it would be subject to approval from Dodge County or any other entity that's party to the interlocal. I'm not sure I'd put it in that paragraph. That's an indemnification paragraph, but if it were put in there, then it would have to be approved by everyone. And I mean, if you want to have a designee who's a central communication officer, you're adding another layer. But I mean, if everybody agrees to it, then it can be done. If you want it to be in the policy itself, but it have to be approved by all the parties.
Councilmember Jacobus?
I'm fine with the language as it sets, and without beating this up anymore, then we kind of already started down that path. I'd like to see a policy in the near future developed, so prior to any emergent event that would possibly occur down the road, I will put a lid on it, and hopefully we can address a policy at a later time that will be beneficial to all of council.
Any other comments? Councilman Jensen?
With that, I'll make the motion to authorize the mayor to sign the interlocal agreement with the Dodge County.
Is there a second? Councilman Legman?
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Moving on to unfinished business, item 18, resolution 2019-225 of the City Council of City of Fremont, Nebraska to approve Brooks Hollow Second Edition Final Plat. This time we'll have staff report. Jennifer?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the Brooks Hollow Second Edition Final Plat. This has come back. We continued it from the first meeting in November. I don't recall the date of that. It is associated with the annexation and the change of zone, both of which are on third reading tonight, as well as the subdivision agreement, which is further down under new business. The proposed plat is 18 lots. It's in conformance with the preliminary plat. Staff's recommendation is approval contingent upon the subdivision agreement. I'd be open for any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Eurer?
Yeah, see, Dave's not here tonight. I assume this might be a question for him, but I'll pose it to you. So my understanding is that there had been previously in this subdivision some potential grading, drainage, or detention issues that were created, some flooding issues in some of that heavier rain that we had. I got some calls from people that were not happy with regards to new homes that were flooded practically instantly. And so I'm wondering if this design plan has adequately attacked that to make sure that we actually are ensuring that grading and drainage and detention in this particular subdivision is doing what it's supposed to do. Do you know?
The comments that we received were from the Assistant City Administrator for Utilities. He did not have any concerns with the plat as it had been presented. But Dave's not here tonight, and I don't want to speak for him. He is, I don't have any comments attached to this at all, so he must not have provided any, or I would have included them.
Councilman Eurer?
I have a couple other questions, I guess. Just in looking at the diagrams and documents themselves, and a statement that was made in your staff report, consideration given for sanitary service of North Lot 3 and Lot 6. I want to be sure what that's stating and which lots I'm specifically looking at. Are those the northernmost lots, 1 and 6? There are a lot of lots
Right,
labeled 1 and 6 on this diagram.
And what that comment refers to, and easements have been provided from the developer's engineer, they would have sanitary sewer coming in from the north, and provided that easement along the north where that cul-de-sac is for the sanitary sewer service.
Okay.
It's just easier to get into it during the development process.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Mayor, Council, Maggie Deargios, Deer Point Development, 2445 North Broad Street. Just a quick, to address the drainage issue. In the initial edition of Brooks Hollow, which was 26 lots, there was not a drainage plan. I am not aware. There was heavy water during the 400-year flood, but I'm not aware of anyone in the initial phase of Brooks Hollow that had water in their basement. So if you did have someone, I would love to know who that is. We have put a series of French drains in along that area, and so I think we've taken care of everything. In the first edition, which is another 16 lots, there is a drainage and grading plan that was required by the city. And as each lot is sold and as each person begins to build, the builder is given a copy of that drainage and grading plan, and they are required to have it surveyed before and after to make sure that they are meeting the drainage requirements. When we did that addition, initially we were going to have 3 drains, and we ended up having another 2. Steve Dodd's on his way here. I wish he was here right now because he could answer this specifically for you. But drainage is a very important issue to us, as it is to all of us in Fremont. There's only so much we can do because there's not, Luther Road doesn't have the drainage that it should have, and we wish that it did, and that the city and the county would join forces to do that. But I hope that answers some of your questions. Anything else?
No.
Okay.
Let me just say, I thank you for offering that information. It's helpful. And I just wanted to make sure I got those points out for the constituents that did raise some concern. I'm confident you're addressing them, and it sounds like you are, but I wanted to make sure that I asked those questions on their behalf.
Absolutely. I think we've had many conversations. I wish Dave was here tonight too, but And when Steve's here, I know this item might be passed already, but we're happy to talk drainage anytime. Okay? Okay.
Any other comments from the public? Comments from council? Councilman Ure.
Make a motion to approve Resolution 2019-225 for the final plat, second edition of Brooks Hollow.
Councilman Legman.
I'll second it.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 19, ordinance 5513 to rezone property associated with Brooks Hollow, generally located at Aberdeen Street and Peterson Avenue, from R rural to SR suburban residential. This would be the final reading. At this time, we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the final reading on the change of zone associated with the final plat that you just approved. It's from R to suburban residential, and it's associated with the next item, which is the annexation, and then further on the subdivision agreement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Thank you, Jennifer. Any comments from the public? Any comments from council? Councilman Ure.
After discussing this item at the last council meeting, I have a document I'd like to have entered in the record just for historical purposes for its value at this juncture. It's an email from the county assessor's office that I received.
I would take a motion to receive. Councilman Yerger,
I would make a motion to receive the document.
Councilman Jensen,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Councilman Yerger.
The reason I felt that I needed to just put that into clarity for myself and for other council members is if this comes up again. At the last meeting, I raised some questions as to whether or not it was in the city's best interest to be looking at rezoning the entire area here rather than just rezoning a portion of. And you'll notice in the staff report, it's called an island. And you know, we're zoning only 18 lots of that island and leaving the rest as rural. I still see personally no legitimate reason for not rezoning the entire donut hole to SR at this time, and no reason really to leave a portion as rural, given the fact that you can utilize that in a residential area with a permit as well. That's the reason I reached out to the county assessor's office to get some clarity, because we had some discussion at the last meeting, and you can see from the email that she sent me that rezoning does not change the valuation that would be used on land that's farmed. It would be 75% of market value is what she states, and even if we annexed it and they continued to farm it because we allowed them to do so, they would still not tax it at more than 75% of market. And that was the issue that I had last time with regards to why aren't we just rezoning this whole thing, because it is surrounded by SR residential, and a conditional use permit would still allow the owners to farm it if the council was allowing to do it.
So at this point, the request is to, still, this ordinance is to rezone property associated with Brooks Hollow, which is located at Aberdeen Street and Peterson Avenue. the other issue in regards to the other parcel is not on the agenda and can't be discussed in regards to an Opens Meeting Act violation. So really, we just need to deal with this item.
Well, I understand that, Mayor, and what I guess I would like other council members and my constituents to understand is I appreciate the Deers development at Brooks Hollow and the homes that you build there. I don't have any objections to those, and I don't have any objections really to the 18 lots. My concern is that we don't do these kinds of things piecemeal, and so to the extent that I am supportive of what you're doing but not voting in favor of this tonight, that's why. I just want you to know.
Any other comments from council?
I can't comment, can I?
Councilman Coons?
I'd like to make a motion to hold final reading, approve ordinance number 5513.
Councilman Jensen?
I'll second that motion.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Now we'll have final reading.
An ordinance of the City of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally described herein as generally located at Albertine Street and Peterson Avenue, Fremont, Nebraska, from R rural to SR suburban residential, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading.
Ready? Cast your votes.
The motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Item 20, ordinance 5514, annexing by voluntary petition Brooks Hollow, second edition. This would be final reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the third and final reading for the annexation that's associated with the Brooks Hollow second final plat and the change of zone that was just approved and the upcoming subdivision agreement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jennifer? Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Mayor, Council, Maggie Deers-Yost, Deer Point Corporation, 2445 North Broad Street. I'm going to address the annexation issue and just clear up a couple things. Thank you for voting to approve the rezone of the 5.76 acres for us to bring in the next 18 lots into Brooks Hollow. Nebraska is an ag state. Dodge County is an ag county. Fremont is an ag town. If growth is going to occur, it is highly likely that it is going to be farmland that is developed into its next use. There is no doubt in my mind, if the remaining acres are zoned residential, that the next step you will take is to attempt to annex the rest of these 15 acres as well, which not only leaves us at the city's mercy to keep farming it until we develop it, it then does become the county assessor's decision at what rate to tax it at. She will tell you that there's always been an unwritten rule in Dodge County that ag land that is within the city limits will be taxed at the ag rate. However, this is an unwritten rule, and that leaves us extremely susceptible. In her email to you, Councilman Yerger, she also said that if it is annexed into the city, that zoning, annexation, and the ability to continue farming a piece of land is totally defined by the city and not the assessor, which is why 2 weeks ago I said to you that these issues go hand in hand. If you want to end up rezoning as we come to you with the next phase, which is coming shortly, and you want us to rezone that entirely as well, we think that that puts us at an unfair disadvantage. They go hand in hand. If you want to change it and rezone it to residential, that opens the door to then annexing it. To date, we have developed traditionally without the use of any assistance such as TIF, NIFA funds, etc. We have done this responsibly, and we've done it with integrity and at significant cost. To attempt to rezone, and then we know the purpose is then to annex, it's a two-part, our undeveloped land that we are currently farming into the city, not only to face the possibility of a significant tax increase, because it would then be an unwritten rule, but the fact that the city then, you could refuse a conditional use permit for us to continue to farm it. That is a slap in the face and a signal to developers like us that the goal is to make it as difficult and as expensive as possible to create and spur positive growth in our community. So I hope that that clears up a couple of the zoning and annexation correlations.
Any other comments from the public? Comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
And I want to appreciate the developer's comments with regards to annexation and zoning. And I would only add this with regards to the continued use and farming of what appears to be inside the city, even though not annexed, areas, which we've had become across council now a couple times. And there are and have been, from constituents, calls that I've received, concerns about the health and safety and welfare of the surrounding area. In this particular area, it is going to be surrounded by SR, which is the premium housing in Fremont. It's not just that it's on the periphery of, it's surrounded by. And so that does create a potential hazard and risk for the folks living in that area, and I think that's why I've gotten some calls on this in the past. Nevertheless, despite my reservations and my desire to have donut holes closed in the city for, I think, good cause, I will actually move to approve your voluntary petition for annexation of this particular area as a step in the right direction, even though I'd like it to be fuller than that. I'm certainly, I'm not opposed to your development in any way, and annexing this at the time we've rezoned it makes perfect sense in that regard. So I make a motion that we approve this.
So that's a motion to hold final reading. Councilman Jensen,
That's second for that.
cast your votes. Councilmember Jacobus and Jensen.
I did not register your votes.
Oops.
Thank you. The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
And now we'll have final reading. Do you have something you want to?
No, I
You're
pushed
just
the
on.
wrong button.
An ordinance of the City of Fremont, Nebraska, annexing by voluntary petition property generally described as a parcel of land located in the southwest quarter of Section 18, Township 17 North, Range 9 east of the 6th PM, Dodge County, Nebraska, and extending the corporate limits to include said real estate, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading.
Ready? Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 21, ordinance 5515, detaching property consisting of 12.34 acres generally situated east of South Main Street and north of Farm Hills Road. This would be for final reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This item and the following item are both on third reading. This is to detach 12-ish acres from the city of Fremont. It is then, will be annexed into the city of Englewood. It'll create a straight boundary line, so it'll make activities between the two cities much cleaner in the future. And the following item is to annex property that has been detached from the city of Englewood, which is where Costco is going to place their testing lab. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jennifer? Any comments from the public? Comments from council? Councilman Coons?
Make a motion to hold final reading and approve ordinance number 5515.
Councilmember Jacobus?
I'll second his motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Now we'll hold final reading.
An ordinance of the City of Fremont, Nebraska, detaching property located in Section 26, Township 17 North, Range 8 East, Dodge County, Nebraska, and altering the corporate limits to remove said real estate, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading, Mayor.
Ready?
Yep.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 22, ordinance 5516, annexing by voluntary petition 2.821 acres of property described as attractive land being a portion of Lot 8, Poultry Complex Addition, generally situated on the south side of Cloverly Road, approximately 195 feet east of South Main. This would be the final reading as well. As explained, it goes hand in hand with item 21, but if there's questions for Jennifer, she will take questions. Any comments from the public? Comments from council? Councilman Legban?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to pass ordinance 5516
And hold final reading.
and hold final reading. Thank you.
Councilman Coons?
I'll second that motion.
Cast your votes. Councilmember Jensen?
Wrong button.
Rough night.
Motion carries 8-0,
yet.
Mayor.
We'll now have final reading.
An ordinance of the City of Fremont, Nebraska, annexing by voluntary petition 2.821 acres of property described as a tract of land being a portion of Lot 8 Poultry Complex Addition, a platted and recorded subdivision in part of the southeast quarter, the northwest quarter, and the southwest quarter of Section 25, together with a part of Section 26 and a part of the north half of Section 36, all in Township 17 North, Range 8, east of the 6 p.m. Dodge County, Nebraska, and extending the corporate limits to include said real estate, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading, Mayor.
Ready? Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 23, ordinance 5518, repealing and replacing Chapter 3, Article 7, Section 3701 of the Fremont Municipal Code titled Municipal Library Operation and Funding. This would be for the first reading. At this time, we'll have staff report.
Tim Buckley, City Attorney. What you have again is an ordinance that came about after some discussion regarding what the authority of the library board is. Do they have hiring authority? Are they an advisory board to the city? And there was some conflict in the code sections that this ordinance is an attempt to clean up. And based on legislative history from prior enactment of city code, it appeared that the city intended that the library board be an advisory body. And that's following Article 16 of state statute. Another draft ordinance was introduced by Councilman Yerger, which significantly expands the scope of changes in the code with respect to the library, but I will defer to him in support on that draft.
Any questions? Councilman Yerger.
I would only add to the city attorney's discussion that there is alternate language for ordinance 5518, which is an expanded version of the existing Section 3, Article 7 of City Code. Specifically is I'll call it a complete rewrite, but mostly it's a red line that brings things into accord with state statute and previous city code, and some recommendations, et cetera, with regards to the Nebraska Library Commission as well. Having put that all together and now having it in the council's hands for a couple of meetings, but only in the public's hands for this meeting, and the library board's hands yet to be determined, they have yet to be able to meet to go through the proposals that are in front of us tonight. My recommendation with regards to this is that we not take further comment on first reading, and we postpone or continue this item to the last meeting of January to at least afford the library board the opportunity to read and opine on the material that's before them, because they haven't yet had a chance to meet.
Any other comments from council? I do have one item I'd like to enter for the record. It's the top 24 first-class cities by population, showing the authority of the library board and the section of the municipal code governing their library board. I would take a motion to receive. Councilman Jensen,
I'll make that motion to receive.
Councilman Legman, cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Councilman Yerger,
I'm not sure if we're entertaining the motion that I made to delay, or we're still taking comment. Where are we at? Well, I had a motion on the floor to continue this to the last meeting in January originally, but we didn't act on that and took documents instead. And so I'm wondering, is this open for further comment, or we're going to move back to my motion?
we'll move back to your motion. Councilmember Jacobus.
I will second his motion to continue this to the last meeting in January.
Yeah, I don't have the exact date. Believe it's January 28th. So we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Moving on, item 24. Ordinance 5519 pertaining to the sale and conveyance of real estate, a portion of Lot 4 of the Nelson Business Park owned by the city of Fremont, Nebraska to Dell Peterson and Associates, a Nebraska corporation pursuant to Nebraska law. This would be for the first reading. This item was removed at the last meeting due to the fact that the applicant could not be here. We also had some questions and concerns in regards to the land value, and through those conversations, the applicant has came back with a different offer of $160,000, And the applicant is here, and they would like to give a short presentation of next steps or what their thoughts and dreams are for this piece of property. So with that, Steve Peterson.
Thank you, City Council, Mayor. Del Peterson Associates. Oh, Steve Peterson, 419 West Judy Drive, Fremont, Nebraska. Again, we have been here in Fremont and have been a auction firm that has not only worked in Nebraska, but in multiple states. We have started, my father started this back in 1972. Prior to that, worked with Taylor & Martin. And we have been established out there, a smaller office built out by that same Judy Street. And then now the new office that we have that we are currently selling, that is out on that 419 West Judy Road. We have outgrown our current building and are looking to go out to the Nelson business area, thinking that that would be a viable option for us for our growth that we want to do. Currently, with 30 to 50 employees, looking over the next 5 years at 100 plus sales representatives, and we feel that that will bring substantial revenue to Fremont. As you can well see, that since we've been here since in the 70s, we have enjoyed and made a lot of relationships here in Fremont, and currently have built a new hangar here in Fremont. So we aren't going anywhere. We feel that with our current staff and with those that we're trying to employ, that we will also see a substantial growth in revenue as well in our Fremont area. So we appreciate your consideration in purchasing that ground. We have visited with and understand there is a covenants out there, and I have visited with Mr. Bruce Nelson as well as Mr. and Mrs. The Harrys of the Fremont Contract Carriers, and had a very good relationship with those, and are currently working with those two other parties, and feel that they have a good understanding. We are working together on the situation out there and within the covenants. So we would really appreciate, we first, again, offered what the appraisal was, and then seeing that there might be a need to increase. We have, as the mayor had mentioned, we have upped from the appraisal of the $111,200, went up to $160,000, which is a pretty substantial increase from what the appraisal was. So we ask for your consideration in this, and any questions I would be more than happy to answer.
Councilmember Bechtel.
You pretty much did answer my question. I was going to ask if you guys are how you guys are going to work within the covenants, and sounds like that. Sounds like you have a plan for that.
Yeah.
I know of a couple of the regulations, like it has to be brick and mortar. I think it has to have underground sprinkler systems, stuff like
Yeah.
that. But if you're in contact with Bruce, sounds like everything's going smooth.
Yeah, it has been a good relationship, actually visiting with them and making sure that we're within their covenants. And honestly, we're showing them the architect. We're still working with the architects to get the drawings put together, but it will be a very attractive building off of 275.
Councilmember Jacobus.
I just had a very brief question. I noticed in the contract that it exceeds more than 180 days, and in times past on these contracts, they typical are held to 180. Is there a reason why it goes off into early July?
The only reason we were asking that there might be an open end, of course, we're selling our 419 West Judy Road. We're trying to get some tax advantages there as well with a 1031 exchange if all possible. Okay. We have some interested parties in our 419 West Judy Road, but we don't have a written sales contract yet. Okay. And so we wanted a little bit of flexibility and asked the council to consider the little flexibility in reference to that.
That answers that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Any comments from the public? Comments from council? I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. I believe that's where we're headed here. Councilman Jensen.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance 5519.
Councilmember Bechtel,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll have two more, or now we'll hear first reading.
An ordinance pertaining to the sale and conveyance of real estate owned by the city of Fremont, Nebraska to Dell Peterson and Associates, Inc. and Nebraska Corporation pursuant to Nebraska law on first reading.
There'll be two more readings on this particular ordinance. Moving on to new business. Item 25, motion to approve Brooks Hollow subdivision agreement. At this time, we'll have staff report. Jennifer?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. As I was looking through the packet, I realized that the exhibits to the subdivision agreement weren't attached in the packet, so I have those to hand out. Take a motion to receive.
Councilman Legman?
I make a motion to receive.
You want me to second?
In a second,
Second.
Councilmember McLean.
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0 to receive, Mayor.
Jennifer?
Yeah, those attachments are the copy of the final plat, the grading, paving, water, sanitary, and storm sewer improvement plans that are referenced in the agreement. The subdivision agreement is a pretty standard agreement that we have developed over the last year and a half or so. It talks about what the city's responsibilities are, what the developer's responsibilities are, and what the obligations are for the city and the developer. I've kind of highlighted those in the staff report. And with that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Councilman Yerger?
In page 7 of the section 4, at page 7, it talks about commercial and multifamily apartment buildings in that particular paragraph. And I'm not aware that this particular subdivision is putting in any multifamily commercial apartment buildings in this area. And I guess my thinking is, even though this is a boilerplate subdivision agreement, I would think that paragraph doesn't need and shouldn't be in this agreement because it's not applicable. At page 7. It says commercial and multifamily apartment buildings in section 4.
Yeah.
Apportionment of costs. At least on my copy. I'm just thinking that paragraph doesn't need to be there.
That's Brian Newton, City Administrator. That's a provision that we had in the last one. Doesn't hurt anything because it doesn't apply because they aren't doing any commercial multifamily in there, but we can certainly strike that paragraph.
I would like to have it stricken because it doesn't apply, rather than to approve something that could be used to say that it does later. So, and with regards to streetlights, can you enlighten me with regards to what DS1 rates are for I assume that's the $2,700 fixture rate?
Correct.
What are those?
I'll let Mr. Newton respond.
Oh, Troy may have to help me. Residential, we have two different styles. One's more of a decorative, I believe. One's a standard and one's the decorative, right? The DES one is the decorative. That's why it costs a lot more.
Okay, just curious. It wasn't described and I didn't know what it was. At page 8, where it talks about the sewer systems and the sewer lines, et cetera, where does the subdivision sewer line connect to the city line?
I'll have to defer to Troy or Public Works.
So I believe it all goes, it'll go to the south down, what is that? On the left street there. And then it looks like there's an easement on the east side that would go south, and it would go to, it basically would go to the, ultimately it would go to the Johnson Road.
To go down Aberdeen and then over to Johnson Road?
I don't know the exact route it goes through the subdivision, but it drains that way. It does not go back to the west.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that the, at page 9, I think the developer already answered my questions with regards to stormwater management and detention, and I think she addressed those, so I won't ask that question again. At page 13 of the agreement, and I know this has been in other documents as well, I think I may have asked this question, but at page 13, at item R, obligation to construct and operate, that paragraph provides, it doesn't appear to me anyway, to provide any recourse to the city with regards to the developer has the option to perhaps stop development for whatever cause. Not sure they ever would, but if they did, and we had already put in things like gas and electric, because, you know, it was early enough in the process, we'd already done our work. And then for some reason, this paragraph is invoked, and they didn't continue. Is there a particular reason why the city doesn't have any safeguards in this paragraph to be paid for what we might have already expended at the time this project would be suspended? And if there aren't any, should they be in this paragraph? And if not here, should they be someplace else in the document, because I didn't find them?
Tim?
I'm just looking at this paragraph. I mean, if the city decide, if the developer decides to pull out of the project, then the termination clause would be triggered, is what I'm looking at. And and what was your specific question?
Well, it looks like paragraph R pretty much is built around what the developer has discretion to do. My concern was if the city had already performed some of its duties with regards to construction and gas and electric or whatever ours might be relative to the subdivision, and then it was terminated for whatever reason. How did the city's ratepayers get its funding back for stranded investment if this project weren't to complete? And it's not just this project. This language has appeared in other subdivision agreements. So I'm definitely not trying to point out Brooks Hollow in this regard. This is a standard agreement. I think I asked this question before, and it has not yet been resolved to my understanding, and I'm concerned that the ratepayers don't have any protections here if a development gets stopped for whatever reason and we've expended funds.
So, Brian Newton, City Administrator. So the $750 for the electric is paid up front. I believe we charge that up front, Troy. So we would be paid to put in the electric services, so they would already be done. We don't charge anything for gas, and we don't put gas in until the home's constructed. And that's only if they want gas, so we would not have any gas facilities. Anything that's put in for water and sewer is done by the developer and turned over to the city. So I don't think this utility would have any costs into a project that we wouldn't already be recovered. So.
Thank you. So with regards to, I think in the original the agreement itself here, the subdivision agreement, doesn't contain this contingency, but it's in the zoning approval that was covered earlier this evening, which required construction of barricades. And since that's a item that I think in the contingencies for zoning was to be a developer cost, I'm interested in why that didn't appear in the list of items that the developer has to provide as a part of the agreement.
Jennifer,
There
do you
would
know-
certainly be a cost associated with it, I
Yeah, so
assume.
I remember, Councilman, yours, right, there was some requirement for barricades.
Yeah, there is a requirement for barricades at the
Is that
end of the
part?
streets. I think it just didn't get included in the boilerplate. I think it's certainly something we could add.
You can certainly add it. Do you have any enforcement mechanism in the zoning? Other than if we don't put it here?
No, not really. I mean, we can, not in, the same enforcement mechanism we have for anything else. It would be good to put it in the subdivision agreement. It's a good catch.
I'd like to have that done, please.
So we can amend it and just add it tonight if you want.
And then I have one question with regards to those barricades, because the subdivision agreement, and since it wasn't in this particular, excuse me, not the subdivision, the zoning contingency and the subdivision agreement didn't really address this. When we do add something in that regard, I'm curious as to the nature of the barricade construction. That is, how significant are those barricades with regards to the end of the street? Can you
It's
move
typically-
around those barricades without leaving the street?
No.
Once they're constructed?
It's typically, so the barricades are just, so at night, somebody doesn't come down that road and driving fast and drive out into the field. It's to designate the road ends here. It's typically 2 large posts with maybe 2 2x6s and some reflective tape on the end. I've seen it done with just 3 signposts with like the reflective signage on it. It's not removable. It's not like a flashing barricade you would see on a construction site. It's a permanent structure, but it's not movable.
Okay. In adding something into this subdivision agreement, would there be any specifications that are necessary in that regard?
I believe it's called out in the manual of uniform traffic control devices, MUTCD. It's a typical.
So by reference, you could control that?
Sure.
And those barriers would prohibit you from going around the barriers without driving over the curbs?
Nope. You could do
They
that
would not.
if you'd like to do that, go ahead. But it's to prevent people from driving out into the field at night and not know that the road's there. It's not a barrier. You can drive
It's not a
around them.
barrier to access, it's
Nope.
just a dead end?
It's an end of
kind a
road
barricade?
marker is really what it is.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Any comments from the public?
Hello again. Mayor, City Council, Maggie Deers Yost, Deer Point Development, 2445 North Broad Street. I just want to start off by saying this is the first time that we have had to do a subdivision agreement. And I think 2 weeks ago, I listed off how many times we've brought subdivisions in, and it's in the almost 20. And so this was new for us. It's clear that we got some samples of Sunridge and Morningside. There have been some that have been done more recently than that. And so we do feel like we are, I hate to use the word guinea pig, but we are part of the process that the city is working toward in order to create a template. And so we've combed through this as best as we can. Our attorney has worked with Pat Sullivan, who I think also, has done some of the subdivision agreements for the city, and so I think it's largely based on the agreement from Papillion, if I'm not incorrect. So we've done our best we missed the apartments. I want to point out that some of the subdivisions that came prior to us where we have agreements, we're not getting what those guys got. We'll talk like in terms of fire hydrants, and I know that these are some of your hot buttons, and so we already are having additional costs that we haven't had before, and those will add up for each of the 18 lots. I have a concern on the barricades. We've never had barricades. We have always had signage at the end of the roads. And to revisit a previous discussion we've had here over the few weeks, we farm this property when we are, before we develop it. And so the access to get to that property is either around those signs, and we don't want to go over the curbs, or we move the signs down when we're seeding and harvesting. We also maintain the perimeter of that. We have different companies that come in. I have a couple people here in the back that live on the perimeter, so they know we spray for the weeds around the fences, and we try to keep the mowing. We try to maintain it. So I have a problem with a permanent barrier going in at the ends of the streets. And so if there's something that we could do to remedy that, that would be much appreciated. But again, this is a work in progress, and so we've done our best to try to meet the city's needs. And so, you know, this is somewhat of a baby that we're raising here, I think. And so it would be great when the city has a template that is fair to everyone and equal across the board. So that's my comment on that. Any questions? Okay.
Any other comments from the public? Comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
I'd make a motion to approve the subdivision agreement with amendments to eliminate the references to commercial and multifamily, that paragraph that's on page 7, and to require an addition with regards to the barricades at the end of the street that corresponds with what was agreed to in the rezoning contingencies.
Is there a second? Councilmember Jacobus.
I'll second his motion.
Cast your votes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay,
Councilmember
I
McLean.
think we have a right to clarify what we're voting on before a
Okay.
vote. I'm not clear about whether we're voting on the barricades to be permanent or not permanent. So if we could get a clarification on that before we vote, I would appreciate.
Base, just.
Would you have in the zone?
It just says barricades in the zoning. I think the MUTCD, which Troy referred to, does have temporary barricades. I don't think that they have to be necessarily a permanent structure. It could be something like a Jersey barrier that has reflective striping. The purpose of those is so Brad doesn't take his race car and drive through the field.
Tim?
Drinking a beer.
Tim
right?
Buckley, City Attorney. So I believe, Mr. Yerger, your motion was to approve the subdivision agreement with those 2 amendments.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask that you withdraw that motion, and I think it might be better to take up each amendment separately and then vote on the agreement as amended or not amended.
Councilman Yerger.
I guess I'm puzzled by that because I think the developer has acknowledged that they're not doing commercial and multifamily, and that paragraph doesn't belong, and I think staff did the same. And certainly, including a paragraph on barricades is appropriate. It was part of the zoning requirements that the council just approved, and referencing that as a part of the build requirements at developer cost would certainly seem to be appropriate since we've already approved it in the other matter. How they're constructed is, perfectly fine with regards to whatever the standards are. I'm not trying to specify those. I just think we need to have something in here that says they're going to be built because the zoning change required that they be built at the end of those streets. And so I don't understand why it would have to be separated. We can certainly separate them, but I don't understand why there's a need to do that. We're amending one agreement.
Can we just do the amendment first with those 2 items?
That's what I
That's what he's
was
trying to
getting
get
at.
to.
Oh, I thought he wanted the amendments to be separate.
So, no.
Well,
Let's just
vote,
do the
vote on
amendments.
you can do the 2 amendments at once, but I want them separate.
I misunderstood, my
Okay,
bad.
yeah.
Okay, that's what
Okay, well then I would make a motion to amend the Brooks Hollow subdivision agreement at page 7 to remove the commercial and multifamily paragraph and to add an item that's missing that corresponds with the rezoning contingency requirements for building of barricades.
It's final plat, not zoning.
Final plat. I thought it was in the zoning, but nevertheless, we've already specified it. I just wanted to follow what we've already agreed to tonight.
Councilmember Jacobus.
I'll second his motion to amend.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Next is a motion to approve the amended Brooks Hollow subdivision agreement. Councilmember Jacobus.
I'd make a motion to approve the Brooks Hollow Second Edition subdivision agreement as amended.
Councilmember Yerger.
And I'll second that motion as well.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 26, Councilmember Jacobus, item discussion of an action plan for remedying potential conflict of interest regarding Resolution 2019-229 and Ordinance 5507, presentation, discussions, and/or voting. Councilmember Jacobus.
I'd actually been asked to bring this to the table, and I didn't bring it in until Thursday after being contacted. And I'd like to make a motion initially to receive. All it is a copy of what's already received in public, I guess, of Planning Commission minutes of past meetings. So I'd like to make that motion now.
Take a motion to receive.
So made.
Councilman Jensen.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
You need a copy.
October 21st was the first time that the Planning Commission had consideration for a conditional use for what's now known as kind of the Linden Street apartment development, a triplex by Care Course / Lifehouse. And that application was twofold. It split the property away from the church. It was a conditional use. And then we had to act on an ordinance, which we had actually started prior, and it got tabled. What you have highlighted on the interior pages 2 and 3 is what that's in reference to. And what's important about that is that during that meeting, Commissioner Bowen, Planning Commissioner Bowen, had recused himself entirely from the meeting because he is actually on one of the boards for the Lifehouse / Care Corps. And I did attend the meeting, and I never thought twice about it. And it got brought to my attention as a reminder that, hey, the Planning Commission member had recused himself, and does that not apply to our governing body? Well, of course it would. Roy Bowen is actually a member at large on the executive committee. And on there, the Board of Trustees, which has been in place for quite a long time, also includes our Mayor, Scott Getchman. And the concern I had was that there was a perceived conflict of interest because a trustee in itself, though may not make governing decisions as a whole, does influence and is supportive of the entity in which they're playing a role in, whether that's financial or other. And a person who's a trustee of the board is either influencing financially or with position in the community. And I would say it might have been the latter rather than the formal, though I can't say that for certainty. So my thought was that this needs to be discussed. We have a perceived conflict of interest. We did have a weigh-in from legal, Mr. Tim Buckley, as well as Pat Sullivan. And the concern then was that there wasn't a conflict because this isn't a typical trustee, though we don't have their policies and procedures and how they operate in front of us. It is an opinion of. And there's no written opinion that has been gathered from the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission either. Having sought some outside legal consult, not knowing all of the entities at play either, the opinion was that the Attorney General didn't, or excuse me, the Nebraska Accountability Disclosure Commission did not hand down a written opinion. And I would like to ask Mr. Buckley if there's a written opinion available,
Not
or
to
if
my,
that was just verbal.
I believe it was verbal between the executive director, Mr. Daly, and Pat Sullivan.
And
Not
I'd
writ-
been told that by their office as well, that they don't hand down written opinions, and that in order to offer one has to be handed to them written form, per se. It is my perception, and after discussion with other legal, that this is possibly a conflict, even though the full explanation, we can't say what had been discussed between Mr. Daly and Mr. Sullivan and how that itself was presented. But we clearly have a mayor who's been involved for quite some time with the Care Corps and the Lighthouse, and that's admirable in itself. But to me, a position of the mayor has to be separated, and there was some very engaging discussion. Our ordinances that we passed, 5507, was one of the strong contingencies to pass the resolution that we passed at a prior meeting. And there wasn't just one vote, but there was 3 votes taken to break a tie in order to get that passed. And the issue I'm taking is there shouldn't have been a vote by the mayor to begin with, because there was no conflict of interest declared on the table.
Councilman Legman?
I don't know what other legal counsel you're talking about or anything, but our legal counsel has spoken. They sent a letter, said there was no conflict of interest, end of story, game over.
Councilman Yerger?
Well, I too received the letter from the city attorney that explained the roles of a board of trustee member and board of directors, and said in his email that sometimes those are confusing and sometimes interchangeable. He also said that it's not surprising that the terms of the board of directors or governors or trustees, that those names are sometimes semantic and might mean the same thing. And he quoted some of the Care Corps bylaws as well, stating that the Board of Trustees members are deemed to be community advisors and ambassadors who take special projects for the corporation. And in my opinion, that says that they give advice and direction to the work, and to work on behalf of the entity with other appointees, and to fill the goals and objectives of the corporation. So I found the fact that, Board of Trustees members are not limited. And not only that, what I found was that the board members that are currently in those positions are, in large numbers, former registered agents of the corporation. They're former officers of the corporation. They're former board members, or they are major donors or benefactors to this corporation, and the mayor's in this group. The city's attorney's email goes on to further characterize the trustee members as innocuous, and only those that are in feel-good positions and having no authority to influence anyone. I disagree with that position entirely, and I seriously doubt that those dedicated individuals would agree with those statements as well. Care Corps is a valuable member of the community, providing an outstanding service, and to think that the trustees who are in a position to do special projects, convey information to members of the community, et cetera, promote those kinds of things, are somehow just in a feel-good authority or, have no specific value, I think is a gross overstatement. Moreover, I'm pretty sure that those folks would not appreciate the attempt to diminish their role and the influence they have on the corporation's affairs and its strategic impact to the city. Nebraska Statute 49-1402 talks about influence. and the means of promoting and supporting and affecting and modifying and opposing or delaying by any means, including providing or the use of information and statistics and analysis. Influence is something that not only do the trustees have, it's something that the mayor has as well. And he is a trustee, and he is also an elected official of this community. Pretty sure it's hard to define those two roles separately as to, well, what are you promoting, supporting, affecting, and modifying? The mischaracterization of the trustee's role that I just covered appears to me to be nothing more than a misguided attempt to justify a failure to disclose an influential position, a trustee member, and involvement with CareCore, and justify an attempt to influence the council's voting on matters that were before this council. I'm really concerned about all of that, and I'm concerned to the extent that we had an example at the Planning Commission that Councilmember Jacobus just put in the record, where a planning commissioner who also sits on the executive committee of CareCore said, I have to leave the room, I can't discuss this. But when we covered these matters at council, not only did we discuss them as council, the mayor discussed these items in both cases and voted in one of those cases as well. I don't understand the difference between Mr. Bowen's participation in CareCore and the mayor's trustee position in CareCore. If anything, I think the trustee position is as much or more influential because of its past history and its involvement in the community. And so that's of extreme concern to me. I'd like to ask, just as a general matter of council, would you advise elected or appointed city officials to recuse themselves from discussion and voting on matters if they hold a recognized or influential position in an entity that's seeking action before the city? Just as a general matter, would that be good practice?
As a general matter, yes.
That'd be good practice, right? Do you support Mr. Bowen's actions to recuse himself and leave the room when this was discussed at the Planning Commission, both of these agenda items?
Based on his identification as a board member, yes.
Actually, he serves, I think, on the executive committee rather than the board of directors, but
All I
nevertheless,
have is the
nevertheless,
minutes
he
in
left.
front of me to go
Nevertheless, he left the room. Do you believe that the mayor had any obligation at all, either legally or professionally or for public perception purposes, to disclose that he was a trustee at CareCore when he decided to make comments relative to both the conditional use permit and the ordinance that described the wherewithal, which was a condition of the conditional use permit? I don't understand. Can you explain the difference between Mr. Bowen's recusal and the mayor's lack of recusal?
I'll try. Based on what I know is in the minutes, and Mr. Bowen's, according to the minutes, is a member of the board, whether it's an executive board or what. I'm not familiar with their structure, but when I read the bylaws of the board of directors of CareCore, there's a board of directors and there's trustees, and they are identified as two different levels of authority. And Mr. Bowen is a board member, which, according to section 3.1, they have the board members have the corporate powers. They are the ones who exercise the corporate power and authority of the corporation. Trustees don't have that power, from what I read. So the difference is what level of authority that the mayor and Mr. Bowen have within CareCore. And I think it was proper for Mr. Bowen to recuse himself.
In the city's attorney's email, in the second paragraph of the bylaws of CareCore, you'll note that the trustees serve in an advisory capacity, do they not?
That's what it says.
Okay. And it also says that they can perform special projects, does it not?
Says they shall meet individually when needed and may take on special projects for the corporation.
Okay. And would special projects include perhaps lobbying or advocating for approvals of whatever the affairs and/or directions of CareCore might be. If they sought to have the trustees take that on, that would be an area of influence that trustees would invoke. Would that not be true?
You could yes, you could call a special project and desire for trustees to do some type of lobbying or influence on a project.
So given the fact that trustees can influence, have an influence on the community and/or others, as well as perhaps the board because of their expertise. As I said earlier, many of these folks that serve on the board of trustees for CareCore are prior registered agents. They were presidents of CareCore. They may have served on the boards as well. And I would assume that new members of the board of CareCore would look to those folks for advice and counsel. Wouldn't that be expected?
I would imagine that would happen.
Okay, so they would be offering significant advice to CareCore, and that might include the development of 4-lot properties and the purchase of properties and whether that's a good idea and what might be good rules and regulations associated with that build-out. And if that were discussed and occurring, then certainly having the mayor espouse those positions at a council meeting on behalf of what might be CareCore's positions, although undisclosed, would be troubling, would they not?
To espouse them, that could be troubling. But I didn't hear him espouse anything at the meeting.
Well, I know that some of those conversations went on for like 30 minutes, and there was a lot of discussion in that regard, and there was no recusal. And, you know, the opportunity was there, whether it was a legal conflict of interest in my mindset or whether or not it was just a perception of the public. It seems to me that Mr. Bowen set a great example for what public officials should do if there's any doubt. You should take yourself out of play so as not to make, at least give the perception to the public that there's something awry. And it would have been a simple matter for the mayor to have turned over that particular agenda item to the council president for discussion and entertainment of public comment and the like, but that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because I really feel he wanted to make comments, and he made persuasive comments that influenced potential votes of the council, and that's what conflict of interest is to avoid. In that regard, I'd like to introduce some commentary that was received from a constituent. It's entitled Food for Thought, that I think makes some really poignant and terrific points relative to the discussion that we have this tonight, relative to just exactly what interpretations are necessary and what state codes might be applicable. And I know that Mr. Sullivan's letter referenced 49-1407 and 1408, but there was no discussion of 49-1402, which this particular document, Food for Thought, discusses. And I encourage the council to read and think about not only those paragraphs that are there, but the rest of the things that are brought out in this particular document, because I think they're on track with what we're discussing tonight as to would it have been legally advisable or certainly public perception-wise advisable to have recused yourself from voting when you sit as a trustee on the board of CareCore. And I think in that regard, it's important for us to make sure that our council voting wasn't tainted in any regard.
We haven't received it yet. So I'll take a motion to receive.
Make a motion to receive.
And I'll second it.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 5-3 to receive, Mayor.
I still have an objection to the document. It says it's received from a constituent, but we don't have a name here. Has this been approved as a legitimate document? We have had problems with these in the past, have we not? I don't know if anybody's reviewed this yet, and you pass it out to us. I think you're trying to persuade us to vote the way that you want us to vote. Am I correct? with this document? Question I'm directing to you, Councilman Yerger.
Councilman, you're,
And I don't know if that's proper protocol, but my answer would be, this document is offered for food for thought. It is not offered for any other purpose. You can read it and take it for face value, or you cannot take it for face value. It provides valuable information. I can tell you that after looking at this document, I looked at the emails from the city attorney and the state codes that were referenced here. I also looked at the state codes that were referenced for food for thought, found them to be very enlightening, and that the rest of the commentary was also enlightening, and I thought it was worthy of the rest of the city council having an opportunity to read and evaluate in making any decisions they might have on this matter. You're free to read them or not read them accordingly.
a couple things, since this is all about me. The last meeting I went to was the evening before the flood, so that would have been March, I know it, it's March 18th, Thursday night. They had their annual meeting. So that was the last meeting I've attended that's of any nature, board meeting whatsoever. I served on the board, got off the board in about 2006, and truly, I think I served 10 years. And at the end of the day, you know, people that provided that kind of service, they sometimes make a trustee. And I'm humbled to be called a trustee, but that's really what you're called, as a trustee. And Hazel Dillon has passed. She basically was served on the board as well, and donated to that cause. As far as you know, the challenge, and we went to legal for a ruling on this, was the fact that you know, truly as a trustee, it's exactly honorary, and again, not attended any of those meetings. You know, you're not, there's no financial gain, there's nothing involved, no involvement of mine in regards to CareCorps or Lifehouse. Getting to the actual issue here, Resolution 2019-229 was approved by the council on November 12th, 2019, council meeting by a 7-1 vote. It was McLean, Ellis, Coons, Bechtel, Jensen, Jacobus, and Legman were for, and the nay was Councilman Yerger. It granted a conditional use permit for a 4-triplex dwelling unit at Linden and K Street, but was conditioned upon the approval of Ordinance 5507, triplexes being built for Lifehouse. 5507 also affected a project in Sunridge that, had that not approved, they probably were going to pull out of their project, because they were getting extremely tired of being told no and having changes come their way. So 5507 stands on its own as an ordinance. It has nothing to do, it had to do with multiple projects, and it's a city ordinance, 5507. Yes, did it affect the Lifehouse projects? Yes, but it also affected the projects at Sunridge, and it affected one other project. So, quite frankly, what I voted on and what I was vocal on was Ordinance 5507. I didn't vote on anything to do with Resolution 2019-229, nor did I vote on it. Councilman Coons.
Yeah, with all that being said, you mentioned this is food for thought. I think we could just chalk up this whole conversation on this item tonight as food for thought. I mean, our city attorneys have given us their legal advice. We pay them for that legal advice. I keep hearing comments about this pseudo attorney that says opposite. I haven't heard a name or met this pseudo attorney to see what his argument would be, and until somebody shows me some credentials with a law degree, I'm stick with what we've paid our city advisory to do. No, chalk the whole evening up to food for thought.
Councilman Legman?
I'm going to second that. Our lawyer has gone through everything, given us the okay. There was nothing done wrong, and the mayor just talked about what was done. It's time to move on. We don't need to grandstand anymore. We need to move on.
Councilman Yerger?
Well, I have to take a little bit of exception to some of what I just heard from personal experience. I'm sorry?
You always do.
I raise a point of order.
You do that too. No one gets
Councilman
involved
Yerger?
except for you.
He's got the floor.
Here, take it.
My exception to what was being discussed here is that legal has applied an opinion, and therefore we must follow it because obviously it's the full and complete opinion. I personally have made inquiries at the Nebraska Accountability Board or Commission and have them tell me that I won't give you a legal opinion orally. If you want a legal opinion from this commission, submit it in writing. We'll consider whether we'll take it up, and if we do, we'll render an opinion in writing. That's how it works. I don't know whether or not our city attorney has a direct pipeline, but I don't believe so, because I was told that's the way it works. We treat everybody the same. You must write it down if you want a written legal opinion from us. And I would hope that this council, if they're going to say, we have a legal opinion from the state, as well as a legal opinion from our city attorney, would at least require the city attorney to file that written opinion from the state so that we actually know we have that information, what was conveyed for the facts, what was conveyed in the assessment by their commission, and we know what the result is. And we don't have that. And I'm not saying that anything was wrong, but we don't have it in writing, and I think City Council President tonight said we don't have it in writing. And my opinion is we should. When those opinions are coming from the state, we should have them. And this has happened on more than one occasion now, and I think it's time for the council to say, we're happy to take those opinions from the state, but we need to put them in the record. Because these actions affected multiple players, and I agree with what the mayor said. They did affect multiple players. They affected the potential property builds on Linden Street. They affected the potential builds at Deerfield, because their conditional use permits were specifically conditioned on the passage of Ordinance 5507 language. I have to say, I worked quite some time with staff on the language on 5507. And in the early parts of that discussion, I was given some accolade for having worked on that. At the last meeting, I was not. As a matter of fact, most of those things that were in that ordinance that everybody balked at, including the builders, largely came from staff. They were not my recommendations initially. I agreed to some of those as a compromise. I'm sorry.
Mayor, point of order.
I am explaining.
Point of order. I don't see how this relates to the agenda item of a potential conflict of interest with the mayor.
It goes specifically to the discussions that were held on Ordinance 5507, and the mayor has already admitted tonight that he made comment on 5507 and he voted on 5507. And the language of 5507 was something that staff presented that I worked on, that at the course of that meeting was further modified by Councilmember Legban to strike all requirements relative to setbacks by eliminating the AR zoning as a last-minute change, which everyone said, well,
But
we
this
didn't
should
have.
be related to the mayor's participation in the
Yes, the
discussion.
mayor the
I
mayor
haven't heard that yet.
the mayor participated in the discussion of that ordinance. Not only did he participate in the discussion of that ordinance and the vote, he also participated in the discussion of the conditional use permit relative to the property over on Linden. He did not vote, I'll grant you, but he did offer extensive discussion on that matter. And CareCore is the entity that was applying over there on Linden Street, and he is a trustee. And so those issues are what's at stake tonight as to whether or not he should have recused himself with regards to the Linden property discussion, and he should have recused himself with regards to the discussion of Ordinance 5507 and voting on Ordinance 5507 besides. And because of his failure to recuse himself or not discuss items that might be beneficial to CareCore because he's a trustee and knows what they would like to have done. Not saying that any of that was wrong, but he was in a position where he should have not spoken, and he did. And as a result, it's my feeling that we ought to be re-voting on those things, just a matter of course, to make sure that the record is clear. And we should put that off and do that in January.
Then as a matter of course, any person who's in the prevailing side on that vote can bring it back for reconsideration on a revote.
Go ahead.
I'm certain.
Oh, I think,
Councilmember McLean.
sorry. Well, this whole issue kind of gets to something that I think you all know gets on my nerves when there's a lot of last minute things thrown in. And there's really, I appreciate Councilmember Jacobus putting on this on the agenda, but there was really like no report. There wasn't any material out there. We got the email, I believe, yesterday. Then we're handed, what I have a problem with receiving a document that I don't know who it's from. I will flat out, that's why I voted against receiving Councilmember Yerger's food for thought document, because we don't know who authored it, and we have had issues with the origin of documents. I think we need to take some action here. I'm not sure what that is, but I agree. I think what our attorney has said, anybody who voted for either of those resolutions within 3 meetings can place them back on the agenda. I don't know that there's an item tonight that can be voted on. There's really nothing proposed here as far as we can't take action on those other 2 ordinances. That's not that's not on the agenda. So
Councilmember Jacobus.
This was an issue that got brought on a Thursday. You received the email via Pat Sullivan, via Tim Buckley on Friday, actually. So if you didn't open it till yesterday, that's neither here nor there. In times past, we would get agendas on Friday and still be trying to add things on Monday. So to try to play nice in that sandbox, getting this addressed on Thursday and having trouble getting into emails and getting a hold of Tyler, et cetera, which I sent an apology for because it came in after 2 o'clock on Thursday. There was nothing to add to the agenda other than I believe there's been a conflict, and you spoke about transparency repeatedly during this ordinance, and so did the mayor, and he used that term. You used the term 3 times, he used it twice during the discussion of that ordinance. And there was ample opportunity to put that conflict of potential interest on the map. That wasn't done. During the conditional use, which is included in part of this discussion, Chris Larson was the person who was the applicant on the conditional use. She was the person who was to speak for it. Ms. Tara Kutcher was allowed to come up not once but twice to address, not during the public hearing. In the mayor's words, please tell us how you got to this point, where you started and how you got to this point. This was actually started in February 2019. The floods occurred in March of 2019. The mayor could have easily participated in those meetings prior to March of 2019. That said, the discussion exceeded almost 5 minutes, and the mayor's discussion on the ordinance itself bled in when I had asked Ms. Jennifer Dam a question about considering an amendment to it and how to go about doing it, and the mayor interrupted because I had suggested revising perhaps or eliminating 2 lengthy paragraphs, which seemed to be a bone of contention amongst us, and of which Ms. Jennifer Dam had actually helped author some of the wordiness and that with Mr. Yerger, but trying to get something adequate passed that we all had thought we had wanted, because you were on board with it also in the second passing. The mayor interrupted that and gave his input for 4 or 5 minutes. And that's when it went south. And I believe not citing that conflict of interest or the perceived, like others have, whether it's true or not, the perception was real. So I'm not really sure what action I can take tonight other than throw this on the table and ask that this all be reconsidered due to that perceived conflict of interest.
The one thing I would clarify is your amendment failed 5-3.
That is correct.
So you were able to make an amendment, and that amendment failed 5-3. Councilmember Yerger.
Well, I'm going to agree with Councilmember McLean in this regard, and that is, I too think there's really nothing that we can take up tonight other than to have discussed the item as we've discussed it tonight, because that was the agenda item. It really was just discussion about the conflict of interest matter, not resolution of what should happen to those necessarily. And to that end, because I am of the mindset that says I think those 2 matters were tainted in that regard, and I'm of concern that there is a time clock on those issues as well with regards to any form of revisitation. The opportunity to have that done might be at the December 30th meeting, but we have already said clearly on numerous occasions now that the December 30th meeting is to be a claims meeting to get the bills paid. It's going to be on an odd day at an odd time, not normal, so it is not a standard meeting, although it may be called a regular meeting. It is very limited in its scope. And so my concern is that we do need to, in my opinion, take an opportunity to rediscuss and revote these issues without the mayor's participation, and we shouldn't do that until January. And my concern is the timing. If we could postpone this or continue this discussion and consideration of those items for revote or modification if necessary, and do so at the January meeting, I'm willing to make that motion in the in regards to transparency, because we can't really act on it tonight. And acting on it in regard to resolving the conflict of issues matters is still a matter that we need to bring up, and January would seem to be the first chance to do that.
My question for legal is, number one, the ordinance is the ordinance, and it had an effect on the Lifehouse project, but it had effect on multiple projects that are moving forward. Are we going to tell those folks, hey, by the way, let's stop now because we can't do that? And in Ordinance 5507, there's no conflict of interest on 5507 whatsoever. In regards to 2019-229, it was a 7-1 vote approved by this council to move forward. So I get that, but it had no vote on that discussion. So, we got 2 different issues here. You got 2019-229, and you have Ordinance 5507. And the ordinance had went through 3 readings and basically went through the normal channels. Councilmember McLean.
I just clarify that I did talk about transparency because there were some major changes that were put into that ordinance at the very last minute. And so that was what I was referring to. And clearly you have done your homework, Councilmember Jacobus, on this and gone back and timed everybody's comments and so forth. And I appreciate that. That would have maybe been helpful in a report to us that could have been attached with the agenda. But I'm not trying to, I don't think this is about trying to cover something up. I think this is about what do we do now, and I don't see really a clear action plan for tonight. So that said, I'm not sure where we go with this.
Legal.
Well, ordinance 5507 passed at the last meeting. Or resolution 2019-229, I believe, was the November 12th meeting. Is that correct? Both of them would be eligible to be brought back at the next meeting in January. Now, as the mayor states, you run a risk of jeopardizing projects that are in the works based on the passage of ordinance 5507. So as far as remedying anything tonight, it really can't be done. But these are eligible to be brought back.
By a councilman. On the
By a
affirmative.
council member who voted in the affirmative on either.
Councilmember Yerger.
I want to correct something that was said, and these two items, Resolution 2019-229 and Ordinance 5507, are explicitly linked. The Resolution 229 specifically had a contingency that said the conditional use permit is not granted without 5507 being passed. Those two are linked. No question about it. And so if one has a problem, they both have a problem. And you'll also recall at the meetings that we had, I specifically asked the applicants about 5507 and whether or not they were concerned about going ahead with their project if 5507 had not yet been approved. And they said, no problem, we're going to go ahead. And I said, well, that's precarious because you don't know what 5507 is going to say when it's finally passed. And they said, that's okay, we're going to proceed. So I don't think we can use as leverage now, well, somehow we would have to undo what they're doing. They voluntarily said that they wanted to proceed regardless of whether or not we passed 5507. And we did not at that time, and they were fine with that. And now if we have to go back and do something to adjust because these two are linked and may need a revote, well, I think they don't have a position that causes them great harm in the sense that they voluntarily agreed to proceed anyway. And to that, I go back, I think I had a motion on the floor that said we should continue this item, this particular item on the conflict of interest and the potential revote on those two issues, 229 and 5507, to the January meeting. I don't know if it was seconded or not, but I did make that application.
He can't.
Can
He's got to be in the affirmative.
Are you saying you made a motion to?
I made a motion to continue the discussion on the conflict of interest, and we have not voted on the conflict of interest, and so I think I'm free to make a motion in that regard. The fact that the conflict of interest ties into the resolution and the ordinance is secondary to we need to move this discussion into January in order to resolve the matters that Councilmember McLean said we're not ready to do tonight, and it's all around the conflict of interest. That's tonight's item.
So you're asking to move tonight's item 26 to the first meeting in January?
Yes, and that will entail discussion of 229 and 5507 as it relates to the conflict of interest applications.
And I was stopped short of interjecting while you were making that argument because I think that argument would be more proper at the next, if this is continued to the next meeting, as to why it should be done.
Need your assurance that both of those items can be addressed at the January meeting, Resolution 229 and Ordinance 5507. If we bring this matter back on conflict of interest discussion, those two items can be tied to that and discussed and adjudicated at the same time.
I can't assure it. It's got to be a vote of somebody who's on the prevailing side to put it back on the agenda for reconsideration. I can't assure that. They're eligible based on the 3-meeting rule that says within 3 meetings any item can be brought back, but I can't assure that it's going to happen. It's got to be somebody who voted in the affirmative to bring it back.
So your decision in this regard is not based on the conflict of interest discussion, but standard reconsideration of items that would necessitate an affirmative vote to bring it back to council, rather than to base it on the fact that the votes were tainted because of conflict of interest.
That's correct.
So an ordinance doesn't become invalidated because of a conflict of interest problem. That's what
The ordinance
you
would...
don't know that.
Okay, you're asking me the question, right? If there is a conflict of interest determined, then an ordinance is invalidated. There's no determination yet. There's been no written opinion from the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission nor the Attorney General. We haven't requested a written opinion from them. Pat Sullivan called Frank Daly, the executive director of the commission, just to get his opinion on how Pat interpreted the statute and the bylaws. We've relied on Frank Daly for years. He's been a tremendous resource to our office, and we think very highly of his opinions.
Councilmember Bechtel.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that my vote that night was not tainted at all by the mayor or anything he said or any of his involvement with the group. I didn't even know he was involved in the group, and if he said so that night, I wasn't paying attention to that and didn't mean a whole lot to me, whether you were on the board or not, to be at 10 years ago or whatever. Actually, what made me want to vote for the project was when they had made it clear that there wouldn't be any sex offenders in the area. At that point, I was in favor of the project, so it had really nothing to do with what the mayor said.
Councilman Yerger.
Is there any likelihood that you'll have a written memorandum from the Accountability Commission before we have the January meeting?
Not unless we ask him for an opinion, but I don't think we're planning on doing that.
Is it your understanding that the only opinions from that office that are legal are those that are rendered in writing?
I'm not sure by what you mean as legal, but I think they only issue written opinions, not verbal opinions.
That's my point. And so in order to have an opinion that might satisfy some who say we have a legal opinion and recommendation by the state, the only way we have that is to have it in writing.
Yes, if you want an opinion from the commissioner or the attorney general, then you have to ask for an opinion in writing, and you'll receive an opinion in writing.
Personally, I think that needs to be accomplished. I'd like to see this item moved to the January agenda, but the discussion on whether or not there was a conflict of interest, I still believe has a direct bearing on the votes taken on those two items. I don't know how we can separate them. And so my motion to take it to January still stands. I'd like to see all of those three items rolled together and moved to the January agenda.
Legal opinion, Resolution 2019-229, if it's not acted on at the next meeting, it basically is beyond the three meeting rule. So
Correct.
If it has to be on the agenda, it has to be on the agenda. If someone has to bring it forward, I mean, but someone in the affirmative has to bring it forward. Councilmember Jacobus.
Then I will bring it forward, and I will ask that it be put on the December 30th agenda for reconsideration for Resolution 2019-229, which is the conditional use.
For just that one? Yeah. Yeah, you voted in favor of it. So yes, just Lifehouse project. Councilman Coons?
Well, I guess I'm really kind of confused as to what we're doing here. There's been a lot of hypothetical accusations thrown out here. So I guess in the issue of transparency, what is our intent here? Is it to tar and feather the mayor, or is it to shut down the care corps? It's a pretty simple request. What is it?
First of all, your comment is somewhat out of line. Second of all, the intent was not to tar and feather the mayor, nor denigrate the Care Corps, which serves a very vital service in our community. Absolutely not. However, when you have an interest, you have a position on a board, whether it's influential, financial, making the rules, or however, there are decisions made, and in your position, whether you're a councilman, president of the council, councilman, mayor, whatever it is, your position does matter, and that plays part of making decisions. We all have that hat on right now. That can be influence, and it's a very influential position depending on your participation in other groups, which is the point. I admire the mayor for participating in this, and he's been in this for a long time. I can't believe it couldn't have been something as simple as declaring a conflict of interest. And until it was brought to my attention, I had no clue. But it is an issue. And we talk about transparency, and it's not taken lightly. This is something that's an issue. When you're on a board, whether it's at a trustee or an executive board or as a board of directors, you do have influence. You have a role within that membership. You aren't there just to wear a badge once a year and go to a dinner party. You influence that board. I've been on many boards in my time, both as ad hoc and otherwise, and there is an influence that you have. You influence other members now seated. So getting the discussion out and getting the understanding that there's a perceived conflict. Some of us, myself included, Mr. Bechtel also has declared conflicts of interest, whether they were real or perceived, it didn't matter. They were stated and they were a perception. And that's all that we ask of each other. That said, I guess there's really not a whole lot we can entertain tonight, but I will ask that that be added to the agenda.
Councilman Yeager.
I'd like to second Councilmember Jacobus's request and also state that, in fact, this is a matter of process or procedure. It has very little to do in that regard with regards to Care Corps as a viable and important entity in the city of Fremont. It is not about that. I want to be perfectly clear. It's not about that. This is about procedure and whether or not proper procedures were adhered to. And I also want to recognize Councilmember Bechtel has recused himself on numerous occasions. And Mr. Bowen did the same thing at the Planning Commission. And the expectation would have been that we would have had the same from senior administration at this council. That didn't happen and probably should have. And so I entertain and second Councilmember Jacobus's motion to bring this back for discussion at the next meeting.
I don't believe your motion was discussion.
Didn't Councilman Yeager have a motion to continue this item that we're on right now to the first meeting in January? And was there a second to that?
Probably not.
I don't recall.
Councilmember Jacobus. Mic's on.
My motion was to have ordinance,
Actually,
excuse me,
we still got Councilman Coons. Then we'll come back to the motion.
Very helpfully put me in my place, but I still haven't had my question answered in layman's terms. What is your real intent here? I mean, the more we talk about this and keep bringing up all these hypotheticals, is delaying what we've got in progress here with Care Corps. So, I don't get it.
Councilman Yeager.
I'd like to answer that question, I guess, with regards to the fact that I just stated. This is a procedural matter, and we need to correct the procedural process that was employed in taking those votes, nothing more. It has very little to do with whether or not Care Corps should have been awarded a conditional use permit or not. It has to do with the procedure and process used to do that, and the same is true with the ordinance. And that's the important thing for us to establish and make sure that we're doing properly. If we're not following proper procedures, following our municipal code, following state law, then we're not operating the way we should as a council. And that's what this was all about, as far as I'm concerned tonight. I don't care who the mayor would necessarily be or anyone else. This is a procedural process for how you appropriately recuse yourself and participate in discussions and voting before this council. And I don't feel that those were handled appropriately, and that's why they needed to be attended to. I'll withdraw my original motion so that my motion is off the table, and we can move on to Councilmember Jacobus's motion.
Point of order on Ms. Jacobus's motion. Can you repeat your motion?
Yes, I make a motion to add the condition of use 2019-229 back onto our agenda for December 30th, and I would also have that motion include continued discussion of this matter.
I don't think that's a proper motion for a vote. I think you can just go ahead and put the item on the agenda. Now, if it's going to be an item for reconsideration of either the resolution or the ordinance, that would have to be discussed and voted on at the next meeting when it's on the agenda. But that can't be taken, there can be no action on that tonight because it's not on tonight's agenda.
Okay.
Any other comments? Councilman Yerger.
So what is the motion? Councilmember Jacobus can make a motion to put 2019-229 on the December 30th agenda?
No, she can just put it on when it's on that meeting, and then it can be discussed at that meeting because it will already be on that meeting's agenda.
Right.
It can't be discussed and decided tonight whether or not to reconsider it.
At that time, though, it would
At that
be voted
time-
on
at that time,
whether
we can
council
vote it.
wants it on.
Well, it can be put on the agenda for reconsideration at the next meeting. Then, when that item comes up at the next meeting, it can be discussed and voted on whether or not to have it brought back for reconsideration.
Right, and that's what I thought she was asking for, to make sure that it made the December 30th agenda.
Well, that doesn't require an action by the council tonight. She can just put it on.
Okay, thank you.
It would be like any other item that council members ask to have placed on for reconsideration. You just send me an email. I think the code says that I have to receive something in writing from a council member to put something on the agenda, so that would be the process.
Councilman Ellis.
I do believe that we as council members can do just about anything we want as long as we vote on it. And I'm just thinking bringing this up on the December 30th meeting is probably not a good idea. That meeting was meant to be short and to be financial. So I would like to put a motion on the table tonight that we as city council members elect to give it a 4-meeting buffer, and that we could then bring it back on at the first meeting in January.
I don't think that's required. It's not it's within the 3 meetings if it goes back on January 12th, if I have my dates right on when it was, on the resolution was passed.
November 12th. Has to be done next.
So it'd have to be done on the
Right.
30th. Okay.
Unless we want to circumvent a rule and make a vote to extend it, which we could easily.
You can make a vote to suspend the rules and give it a 4-meeting buffer then.
Is that your motion?
Yes, that's my motion.
That violates city code. I mean,
City council just
The city council can
violate-
vote to override that at any moment.
but it's really not on the agenda tonight.
It's not on the agenda tonight for a vote.
There's the way the motion is, there's discussion, and discussion was had, and that's it. That's where you're at. And it basically, if it's gonna be discussed, it has to come back on the 30th.
Unless the council wants to call a special meeting. And that's not done by a vote tonight either.
Right. Councilmember McLean.
So if it comes back on the 30th, at that time, you're basically voting to reconsider, and it could be continued, right? I would assume.
Yes.
Well, the vote to reconsider could have a vote to continue. So it can be, it would require a majority of the council to continue it. It would require also somebody in the prevailing side to bring it back, put it on the agenda for reconsideration.
Councilman Yerger.
I have two questions that I'd like to raise, I guess. One is, we didn't open this discussion, this agenda item, to the public tonight for input, which it's my understanding that all items that are on the city council agenda are subject to having taken public input, and I feel we're remiss for not having at least asked whether any members of the public that have stayed wish to address this item. The second item that I'd like to ask City Legal is whether or not the way we have discussed this item tonight about conflict of interest, whether or not there's enough room or latitude in what we're discussing tonight to require that we get a written opinion on this conflict of interest matter from the state, and to do so expeditiously. I suspect that it's not possible because they don't work that fast.
I don't think it would be possible. I don't think it would be required. A request can be made, but I don't know
Well,
what
it may
the
not be
timing would
required unless we require it, and I might do that. My question is, could we get it done in time
That's
to
your
be effective? And the answer is probably not going to happen.
It's
Is
your
that correct?
prerogative. It's your prerogative to request that an opinion be issued, but I can't say how long it would take.
Okay. I go back to my statement then with regards to, are we going to entertain public comment on this agenda item tonight?
Well, quite frankly, we were pretty engrossed in what was going on, so yes, we can have public comment. Is there any comment from the public?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Michael Wiseman. I reside at 1401 North Nye Avenue in Fremont, Nebraska, and I am a constituent. I have listened intently tonight with the discussion regarding potential or perceived conflict of interest and how to address it, and frankly, I don't know where you are, because I don't think you know where you are. Yet you've adopted Resolution 2019-299 and Ordinance 5507 with an issue out there of whether there is a conflict of interest. I guess it's been stated that what is official action or response from the Nebraska Accountability Commission, and that depends on a written question and a response to that, which nobody has said, let's get. And unfortunately, I have heard what I perceive to be kind of a, well, get over it attitude. I don't think that's what you're about here. Just get over it and let's move forward. This has been discussed. We all have an interest here in doing the right thing. We all are appreciative of the acts that CARICOR, now Live Home, do and want to do for the community. But to rush through a proposal and check it against your own master plan, the things that you've said are where items are necessary and things that people, had they had adequate notice, wanted to discuss, why can't you take a breather? But you have to take a direct action so we can get from point A to point B. And I am sure glad I don't sit where you are tonight, because this is a mess. The council meeting I didn't attend because I was out of town, but I watched it on TV, and it was the most confusing council session I'd ever watched. And I don't think it was because of anything any of you did intentionally, but because of the nature of the beast. Because I do agree with Councilman Yerger that the resolutions are intertwined with Ordinance 5507. And it bothers me, because I don't have an answer, that how can you permit a conditional use subject to an ordinance that hasn't been passed? You can condition it on a ministerial act that is for the Department of Development to carry out, and the Planning Department will give you this conditional use if you do this, this, and this, very specific, that does not depend on the discretionary action of the governing body, which is you. You're the governing body. The Ordinance 5507 was not a ministerial consideration. It involves the governance, the discretionary judgment of all of you in the voting and how you vote. You had a tie, and it was broken by the mayor. And my understanding is that that raised a perception of conflict, and it went back further. And I think it needs to be addressed, but what we have to be careful about is it has to be brought up by a member who voted in the affirmative for the first resolution 2019 and 229 to be reconsidered, and I guess that has to be done either at a special meeting before December 30th or at the December 30th meeting. But the issue still comes up, even if you have that discussion. Does the mayor have a duty to recuse himself if the policy of the board is split like it was before on the ordinance that became effective because of the mayor's vote to break the tie, to make the ordinance, not the ordinance, but the resolutions effective? If this sounds like double talk, this is where we are. And as a citizen, it bothers me. And I think you've had sincere discussion tonight, and I think you need to continue it. But I don't think you need to adopt the attitude, let's move on, get over it. We've seen that and how the public reacts to that. And that's all I have to say, and I hope that you can simplify this, do one thing at a time. But I do think you have a problem with the resolution that you passed condition on the adoption of the ordinance that you passed. That was not a ministerial act. It was based on discretionary action of a council that could not be bound at the time that your resolutions were passed. And so I think you have to look at it in tandem. And I think you just have to take a deep breath, back up, and then move forward. And yes, there has been conversation that we have to move forward because a $3 million grant could be lost if it's not spent by 2021, and so we can't get groundbreaking yet this winter and that sort of thing. That's a lot of money. And a vote, a tiebreaker vote to move forward so $3 million isn't lost, that's influence. That's a perception of judgment. That affects judgment, perhaps. But the question is, let's take it one step at a time, let's move backward and do the right thing. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Anything from council? Councilman Ellis.
Again, I'm going to bring up Section 108 from the Municipal Code, Section 15. Any rule of the council may be suspended by a 3/4 vote of the members present. So we can do whatever we want here as long as we have 3/4 of the vote. All I'm asking is for exactly what was just told to us. Let's take a breather. Let's vote to take all of these options and move them into January so you can all enjoy our holiday and not have be bounded by anything that we as previous councils have voted on. We have the power to vote by a 3/4 vote to continue all these. So I would make a motion as a city council to relax the rules of the 3 meeting vote so that these Both of these can be brought back at a later date, later before or after December 30th, and that we set the first meeting in January as the meeting that we do that in.
Councilman Yerger.
I'll second Councilman Ellis's motion.
Legal, you want to weigh in, or are you good?
Can you give me that section again, Glenn?
Section 2 is 108.15. We can do whatever we want. We can over. I guess what I'm asking for is for us to vote on relaxing the rule of three successive meetings.
2-108 subsection 15.
108.15.
15?
Yeah.
I don't have a 15 in my 2-108.
What?
Oh, it's 14.
14.
Well, since it is related to an item that was on the agenda tonight, I think I'm fine with it.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-2, Mayor.
Item 27, I would take a motion to adjourn. Councilmember Jacobus.
I'll make that motion.
Councilmember Jensen.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.